Hey cuties, this is the Dark Side of Perfect. I'm your host, Maggie, and today we are going to be talking about some of the nitty gritty aspects of perfectionism, what that looks like, how it shows up. And I have an amazing guest on the podcast today named Annie. She has been dealing with this a lot of her life, and I thought that she would be an amazing first guest for our podcast to talk about perfectionism. If you haven't listened to episode 2 of The Dark Side of Perfect, I would recommend going back listening to that first, since we do talk about some of the results of perfect and the definitions that I defined in episode 2 in this episode. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Hi, Annie. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Hello, Maggie. Thank you for having me. This is super exciting. I've never spoken on a podcast before or really done anything like this. So,
Well, we're happy to have you.
yeah,
Do you want to let our listeners know a little bit about you?
sure thing. My name's Annie. I've known Maggie for several years now. We met in grad school. Um, she's been a light in my life. So, it means a lot to me being on this podcast with her. My background, I'm originally from the East Coast. I spent most of my time in South Carolina, middle child. This podcast is near and dear to me. Perfectionism is something that has infiltrated my life from an early age. It's something that I've coped with, dare I say, embraced, especially in my late 20s, I would say. So very excited to talk about it. Definitely will be a cathartic conversation, I feel like.
Well, in episode 2 of my podcast, where I talked about some of the results of perfect, I talked about perfectionism as something that causes a lot of burnout, frustration, tension, overthinking, procrastination, fear of starting, those kinds of things. So I'm thinking that today we'll talk through your experience of what you think about when you think about those things. And then hopefully we can give some proactive steps to people also struggling with perfectionism to kind of find their way.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So, in your own words, what does perfectionism mean to you?
What does it mean to me? Wow. I think perfectionism has such a broad definition. It's not fair to say that there's any one right or wrong. It's such a spectrum. I feel like it's been redefined to me over the past 28 years of my life. My therapist one day told me that perfectionism felt like a goalpost, setting unrealistic expectations for yourself. And then even when you sometimes hit those expectations, the goalpost moves. So it's this constant feeling of chasing something that might not feel right or feel possible, but then inevitably not reaching those goals and then running through cycles of inadequacy or lack of self-esteem or lack of self-worth, or like you failed somebody for not achieving these expectations. So it's kind of a roundabout way to define it, but that's kind of how it's showed up for me over my lifetime.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. We've been talking about in this podcast about how perfect is a moving goalpost and how you always feel like you're not reaching it, but that doesn't mean that you're not actually achieving it. So it was good that you said all of those things straight from your
Nail
therapist.
on the head. I did it perfectly.
Um, when did you first start noticing it in your life slash realize that it was perfectionism and not just something that you were normalizing in yourself?
Yeah. I don't know if I can pinpoint a certain time. I know it probably started early. I don't want to say I had an easy childhood, but I definitely didn't have any kind of traumatic experience to point it back to. I think as a child, I was naturally fairly good at anything I started, whether it was, swim team or dance or gymnastics. I was a very resilient, active kid. And I think I had set that expectation for myself early. Like I remember it being like second grade and I had a math assignment due the next day. And I was quite literally like beating my head against an open book binder at like 1 a.m. And I just remember my mom coming in and being like, Annie, good Lord. Like, you're in second grade. Like, it is not that serious. And I was sobbing. And I never had a teacher that told me it had to be that way, or nobody had bullied me into thinking it had to be that way. It was such an internally driven thing. So I wish I could point it back to a situation sometimes. And maybe that's not fair to say, but yeah, it's something that's kind of manifested. And then with the rise of social media and being a child in the early 2000s when all of that kind of came to be. And then, it's hard enough having friends around you kind of define what perfection looks like or what normal looks like or right. And then having that pod expand globally to okay, what does society view as what's right? And then anytime you kind of stray from that, I think that's when I would start to get even harder and harder on myself.
Yeah. It's hard to pinpoint a specific time. I feel like you just feel it in your brain and then you can't get over it.
Yep.
So, I want to talk about sort of creating practicing self-safety when it comes to perfectionism. I think it's one of the hardest parts and where it comes from like when you're in second grade, you don't feel safe in yourself even though you don't know where that comes from. So, I did some research, and perfectionism is linked to increased activity in the amygdala, which is the fear center of your brain. And when stakes feel really high, your brain can't see those mistakes as learning, but instead as danger. So, it's basically just a part of your brain increasing, firing on all ends, telling you that you are in danger, even though it's supposed to be a learning response. So when I was in undergrad, I did this activity where your insecurities, you put a face to it and a name to it, and it would help you to reduce that threat because you would be able to see it as an actual person. So if you were to imagine your perfectionism as something separate and how it speaks to you, what does it look like?
Yeah, that's I don't know. I feel like the way that I've thought about it my whole life has been, I mean, they probably looks just like me, which is the hard part. It's hard
Yeah.
for me to separate myself from it. She's just meaner. She's kind of a bitch. But yeah, I don't know. How have you kind of personified yours?
Also looks like me, but meaner, especially when I'm doing things that feel like fun or resting or quote unquote unproductive.
Yeah.
Like Annie is an amazing painter, loves painting. And so when I'm doing things like that, creative endeavors, it's very mean to me. Have you found that with your painting that it gets meaner with you to you?
Yeah. I was laughing when you even said that. One of my like ticks when I realized that I'm being hard on myself is I don't take compliments well, and it's not like I hate getting them because everyone loves getting compliments, but it's like an awkward response of like I don't know how to properly take that in. But yeah, I definitely see it with a lot of creative outlets. I think, you talk about it's something that you should enjoy. It's something that art in and of itself should be something that is very free flowing and there is no end point. And it's supposed to be this like paper or whatever medium manifestation of what's happening in your brain. And it turns out beautiful no matter what. And art's subjective and all of these things. But for me, I hate to say that I haven't painted in a very long time because I can't start. Because I can't start without the end in mind. And the end is terrifying because it will never be finished in my brain. So it's like, why
Yeah.
start? Um, yeah, which feels pretty bad when that's something that you've enjoyed for so long.
Yeah.
So
And that's definitely something we're going to talk about in a few minutes. I have a whole section on starting and finishing.
there we go.
But since our perfectionism looks like ourselves, it's really hard to push back against it because you can't separate it from yourself. And so all you see is yourself, and you want to practice self kindness, but you also don't want to talk to this bitch and let her be a bitch to you.
Yep.
So, due to this, you can't logic yourself out of a nervous system response, that fear in the amygdala. So, like anything, you have to practice safety. And one of the more popular things that I was seeing online when I was researching this was to say out loud before a task, "This isn't a test. Nothing bad happens if this is imperfect." What I have found in my own life is when I say that, it doesn't work. But as I was reading about this, it was very positive that even if it doesn't work the first time, because it won't, this is a nervous system response, you have to keep practicing, and it's been shown to reduce threat activation and improve task initiation.
Okay.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that is interesting. Add it to the list.
Yeah.
Try it out.
Next coping mechanism. I'm going to tell myself this isn't a test. Nothing bad happens if it's imperfect. And even for tests, I think it's fine if it's imperfect. I have horrible test anxiety, so I don't like that phrasing. The idea of it stands true. So, where do you notice perfectionism sneaking into your day to day choices?
My day-to-day choices. I guess I'll start with some of the more, like, negative not choices, but negative impacts. I feel like I get this all or nothing mentality. If I don't perform up to whatever the standard is that I've set for myself for whatever task or event or whatever it may be, if I haven't met that, it all goes to hell. It's just kind of like, okay, well, now the day is done. Like, I've already failed. Like, we'll try again tomorrow, which, obviously progress isn't linear and all of these things that you hear, but it's really easy to fall into that feeling of I've somehow failed not only myself, but now I failed my family, my friends, people who are close to me when they may not even know what task you have set out to complete, you know? It's just I feel like that mindset is probably the most damaging.
When they negatively impact your conversations and your day to day choices and your relationship with others, is it a feeling that you feel in your body or is it a thought that you have in your head? Or both, or neither, or a blend?
Usually just it's in my head. I don't usually feel it in my body. Exercise is a wonderful coping mechanism for me because it lets you dissociate whenever you're being really down on yourself, and it also feels productive to me. But no, it's definitely a mental game of, okay, is this just a me thing? Or logically, is this also impacting other people? Like, do they genuinely have a thought or an opinion about this? And if they do, should it impact me?
Yeah.
It's like, it's definitely a mental game.
Well, I
But
think that's a good process is that ladder of like, okay, I'm thinking this. Are other people actually thinking this? And if they are, does that actually matter?
definitely.
In the science I was reading, I saw this great quote that thoughts feel true because we are tied to them, just like how our perfectionism looks like us. We're tied to it. So we need to distance ourselves to reduce its power. And I read this really interesting article that MRI scans have shown that noticing thoughts like this isn't good enough, instead of saying this isn't good enough, saying something like I'm having the thought that this isn't good enough, reduces emotional reactivity and improves prefrontal control. So if you recognize your thoughts as thoughts and you follow the ladder of, okay, I'm having this thought, are other people having this thought? Does that matter? Then that can help you regain control of your perfectionism. Perfectionism thrives when identity equals output. So fear skyrockets because you attach your identity so heavily to the idea of perfectionism. So you think this represents me as identity. But the alternative is thinking about this represents where I am today so that you can feel those good enough moments and those good enough choices and feel proud of them. Okay, so next, one of the results that we talked about in episode 2 was overthinking and how overthinking is nervous system overload. And you try to break down the tasks, and then sometimes you break them down too much. Sometimes you don't break them down enough until your brain can't argue with you. Like, you can't start painting, I can't start writing because we think about the end result. So, starting is scary, finishing is scary. Have you found ways to start or finish things without letting the perfectionism fully take over?
Yeah, I mean, it's a process, right? Like, it's ongoing. There's no perfect answer to how to achieve it, but, I think a lot of it's just recognizing, like, the little victories at the end of the day, and I think sitting down and taking the time to think through those roadblocks and, like, okay, if I force myself to do 20 minutes of sketching, or Pinterest is my vice. I can scroll on Pinterest and look at other of people's art and see how beautiful it is and try to gain inspiration from that. And even if I might just copy what somebody else does and
Yeah.
say, like, okay, like, that's a way to get my excitement flowing, get myself more present, be more intact with that. I feel like that's a big piece for starting. But Also, there's an opportunity to have that internal reminder, like, okay, what's something that I have completed and how did I complete this? And then I like to do a retrospective reflection of like, okay, what's something that I really enjoy doing now that I'm fairly good at now that when I started I was terrified. And then I have to go back to kind of that mindset of like, okay, what were the factors that pushed me to do that thing? What made me continue to do that thing? And then what makes me enjoy that thing still? So putting myself back into that place, I think is super helpful.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. In the last episode about goals that I recorded, I talked about breaking down your big goal into smaller, achievable goals, not to do lists, but like small things so you can reward yourself. And I think that that makes more sense than breaking down tasks into small parts that your brain can't argue with, but breaking it down into smaller things that you can reward yourself for. Instead of being like, I'm gonna paint and then only feeling happy at the final result, or not happy, perfectionism, but having little increments throughout.
Yeah, I'm picturing, like, reading a biology textbook in undergrad with, like, a gummy bear after every paragraph
Yeah.
and being like, wow, I made it through 2 dense paragraphs. Here's a dopamine hit." But no, I think that makes sense. I think that, like, obviously the big scary ending is the roadblock from the get-go, so,
Yeah.
yeah. And even not even, like, setting, like, hard, like, mini goals, right? Like, not confining yourself to, "Oh, "I have to write 10 pages today."
Yeah.
As I just said, I have to paint for 20 minutes, but, like,
That's
having
different.
yeah,
10 pages takes a lot of
that's true,
time.
that's true. Um, but but, yeah, just, like, giving yourself, like, a, "Hey, like, did I spend any time today thinking about it, researching, not scrolling on Facebook, Instagram, insert social media device here?"
Yeah.
Like, just, like, recognizing that you're taking a step, you know?
Yeah. Planning is action. Doing it now is doing it. Scrolling on Pinterest, easy.
Boom, any day of the week.
I love Pinterest.
Yeah, you're
But basically, where it comes from, speaking of dopamine, perfectionism blocks dopamine because your brain doesn't register done until it's flawless. So finishing feels unsafe and we avoid it. So the internet and my own advice for everyone is to say, I'm allowed to finish this to 70%. And that is called satisficing. It's a real
okay,
word.
okay, Shakespeare.
And it shows people who aim for good enough that they finish more and learn faster. So if you finish and it's not totally, totally 100% perfect, but 70% perfect, if it's good enough, then you finish more and you learn faster. And then you can apply that to things. For example, last year we were doing this auction. Annie did a painting for it. It was perfect, but I'm sure it took a while to feel that way.
It still doesn't, but thank you. I was gonna say too, to that end, it's like by the very nature of constantly being tough on yourself and like not being able to recognize when like you've done a good job or you've made a little bit of progress,
Mhm.
having folks in your life, close friends, family, partners, what have you, that know that how you feel about progress and like if you've opened up about perfectionism or what how it shows up for you to them. It's really, really beneficial to have those people in your life. I know we have a friend from grad school who was, like, the bomb diggity about celebrating her friend's successes, and it could be, like, the smallest thing. It could be like, "Man, like, you got up and walked your dog this morning, and you've been feeling guilty about not walking them." Like, that's so amazing. You're like, she's so good about that, and I feel like you need people in your life that give you that praise for the most seemingly mundane things because sometimes you can't show up for yourself or you can't recognize that those things are ultimately the big things. So, just another plug for choosing your people wisely and appreciating them for those types of things.
For sure. There's this researcher, Kristen Neff, and she's a researcher on self compassion. And she shows that self compassion predicts resilience better than self esteem because in our heads, self esteem equals success or comes from success, and self compassion works during failure. So when we have our perfectionism, we don't really have the self compassion because we can't have it work during failure.
That's actually an interesting way to look at it. Because like, I've always seen, like, oh, it's, like, low self-esteem. It's like, I'm not good enough. I'm not proud of myself, or I can't be proud of myself because I didn't achieve this unachievable thing, but to your point, it's like the reality, it's like, "Oh, no," it's like, "I failed," but it's like taking the introspective moment of, "I'm human, and this has no impact on me as a person. It has everything to do with how I deal with this dark time or this quote unquote failure or mistake." So, no, that's a cool way to think about it.
So, on that, do you have any small mindset shifts or practices that you have to help with your self compassion and to help loosen the grip of perfectionism?
Yeah, I feel like on that same thread of thought, I used to struggle really hard with making mistakes, especially not just mistakes that let myself down and, don't meet my standards because I make those all the time,
Yeah.
but, like, mistakes that, like, truly impact folks that I love and people that I care about and that care about me, and, miles, years, eons after they've forgiven me for whatever that mistake may have been, I'm still so trudged by it. So I feel like reframing that mistake is okay, like, I might have hurt their feelings, or I might have said something that was offensive that I didn't know, and I have, like, such a guilty mindset. But honestly, like, taking that and actually transforming it into, like, "Okay, I've done this. I clearly know that, like, this hurt this person. I can never do this again." And taking that as an opportunity to say, "Hey, how grateful am I that I've, like, pointed this out? They've forgiven me, thank the Lord, and now I can move forward and never do it again because I've learned this lesson." So, just not dwelling in mistakes has been a huge piece of that, and I think beyond that too, from a mindset perspective, there's a quote by, John Steinbeck, and he says, "Now that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good." And in my midnight Pinterest scrolls, that's a big one on Pinterest. I'll be scrolling on, like, the quote boards, and every time that one pops up, my eyes always get watery because it's like it's such a simple quote. It's from East of Eden. Shout out to that book. Love you, John. But every time I come across that quote, it's like such a simple but gentle reminder that now that you don't have to focus on this, like, super narrow tunnel of what, again, you perceive perfect to be, or what society or your family or your friend group or your community has deemed to be perfect in this, like, tunnel. You can focus on just generally being a good person, right? So just waking up in the morning and thinking, how can I be good? How can I be more forgiving? How can I be more honest today? Like, it's not this, how can I achieve this goal? It's no, how can I show up for people today? And I think that that's been super transformative for me.
Yeah. I think that was all really good advice. What I've been trying to do recently is follow this notice, normalize, soften kind of a trend.
Ooh,
So, I know,
I feel like the
very
S's being
therapeutic
in.
over here. So, basically, you notice this is hard. Then you normalize it and say, other people struggle with this too. And then you soften it and you say, if Annie was struggling with this, what would I say to her?
Or I do like that. Like, you would never talk to somebody how you talk to yourself.
Yeah.
So true.
So, if something is really hard, or if I'm doing something that I think is bad, or like, I guess that I see as bad for myself or not perfect, then I just try and notice it, normalize it, and soften it. And then if I need to adjust based on what I would say to you, I do. And I was actually looking this up to see if other people do this. And apparently, it decreases your cortisol and increases your emotional regulation to do this practice.
And everybody's cortisol is through the roof
I
these
know. I
days.
know it is. I knew I would say it on this podcast and it'd be a buzzword. Cortisol reduced.
Drop that third coffee. You don't need it. One shot of espresso is enough.
So, has it ever affected your relationships with others or yourself in ways that you didn't expect or don't expect usually?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with relationships, especially, like when you're in those really low points and your self esteem's, pit low, your self compassion's pit low, and the people around you, friends, family, partner who care about you, want nothing more than to bring you up and to bring you out of that, whether they're pouring compliments over you or trying to be reassuring. And your mind dialogue is so loud that you can't hear it, and that can be incredibly exhausting to those people, right? Like, constantly having to give you that reassurance and then not receiving any benefit back because you're not hearing them.
Mm.
So I think that's a big piece. Another lesson I learned recently over the last, 5 years or so is when you don't reach those goals, and again, you get to those low points and it affects your mood, it affects the vibe, and you're so in your head and you think that how you're showing up isn't affecting other people. But by the very nature of you being in that state when you're with a close friend who might have recently had a huge success, when ordinarily you would be like incredibly excited about that, you're so in your head about you not meeting that threshold that you can't show that excitement, and that can come off as like you wish them poorly, or you're not celebrating them and they've just achieved something that they should be celebrating, when in reality it's you're so down on yourself that you can't get out of your head to get to that like higher mood to do that. So having that introspection to be like, hey, this isn't about me right now. Like, I can assess and build back those feelings of self-compassion later. Like, I need to show up for my friend in this way because I need to be there for them, and that's what it means to be a friend. So I think just having that self-awareness when you're in those moods to be able to separate it and remind yourself and ground yourself where you are and how you need to show up for your friends and family despite how you're feeling internally. So I think that's a big piece.
Do you find that comparison to your friends or anyone in the world, social media, whatever, makes your perfectionism worse?
I wanna be careful with the word comparison because in those moments, it's less about like a one-to-one comparison of like, I did poorly, my friend or partner did well, and it's more, I've done poorly, I've disappointed myself, I don't have capacity to celebrate this person right now.
Yeah.
So it's less about like, they did this, I did that, this is bad. It's more, I didn't achieve what I wanted to, and now I'm upset with myself. And it appears as though I'm not happy for this person, even though that couldn't be more not true.
But does it ever stop you from pursuing relationships or I guess continuing relationships? Like if you're in that headspace, would you then forgo going to a celebratory dinner? Not because you're comparing yourself to them, but because you feel like you wouldn't be able to show up appropriately?
Yeah, like you feel like you'd be a Debbie Downer, like
Yeah.
you wouldn't be in a good mood, you wouldn't be able to get over that mood. Um, I definitely think it has before. Now I feel like I'm a little bit more self-aware about it. I've been called out on it before, and it was incredibly, disheartening. It's hard to hear that because you never want your friends to think that you're not excited.
Yeah.
So I think that it has before. Moving forward, I think that it's a matter of you have to do the work, the internal work to be able to be an adult and put your own bad mood away
Yeah.
so that way you can show up because it never feels good, you know? You want to be celebrated by your friends, like, when you've had an accomplishment, no matter how small, like we talked about. So yeah, no, that's a really good point.
For internal work, is there anything specific that helped you do that internal work and find that self-awareness that you think that other people would be able to do and benefit from?
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to do that work alone. So I think if you can again ground yourself in the present, doing your what was it, normalize, desensitize.
Notice, normalize, soften.
Thank you. Notice, normalize, soften. Like, name three things you see. Name three colors. One of your faves. Like, grounding yourself in that moment and quite literally pausing for a second. And I don't know if you can do some box breathing, whatever technique brings you back to the present and what's important in that moment, I think is huge. And then whatever work internally that you need to do later, that could involve, if journaling's your thing. Yoga is my big, self compassion exercise. I've never felt more proud of myself, of my body, of my achievements than after a really intense yoga class. So I feel like you need to find your outlet that makes you feel that way, and that can kind of bring me out of it and be able to sit down and say, "Okay, like, I didn't meet the standard for myself. Why? Is that standard even even reasonable?
Mm.
Is somebody else holding me to this standard? Is somebody else stressing me out to where I feel like I have to meet this? Or is this strictly an internal goalpost that I have put into place that I too have the power to move back or bring forward to make it a little bit more attainable and a little bit more satisfactory, or satisfying when I get there?" So yeah, definitely unique person to person. I know it's hard to, again, we talked about trying new things, and it's scary to try new things as a perfectionist because fear of failure and all of those things, but you have to try new things to figure out what works, and yeah, I think that it looks different for everyone, so
Very good.
very good.
Shifting into our final section of integration is what I wrote down here.
Mhm.
Is there anything that you can think of that you haven't already said that you want someone deep in a perfectionism spiral right now to hear from you?
I think that a big piece of it is that, like, even if you haven't, like, been to therapy or diagnosed anxiety or diagnosed perfectionism, or that's too scary of a word, like, I would just say that understand, or at least find solace in the fact that most people deal with these feelings of perfectionism in some capacity or another. I feel like by the very nature of, think of any time that you've gone out to a social event and you've come home and like, wow, I said the stupidest thing, or like, God, did I do well? Did I perform well? It's like, yeah, so that's anxiety, right? But like that could be perfectionism manifested, right? Like you're trying to like be the perfect person at this event. So just recognizing that you're not alone, and there's plenty of books out there to overcome it, and just to give yourself a hell of a lot of grace, because there are a lot of people that love you and think you are amazing. Everything that you've overcome up to this point is fantastic and something worth celebrating, and that you don't need to quite literally walk on the moon to feel valid or seen or successful. And yeah, just give your best every day and accept that that's enough, and I can I can keep going. But that's what I have. I think that's probably the most important.
Before we finish up, I want to reiterate that perfectionism is not a flaw. It's fear dressed up as discipline, and you need safety before you can find progress. So, create a starting ritual. Replace "is this good" with "did I move forward?" Shift that fear centered to meaning based motivation. And give yourself permission. We're giving you permission right here and now to start messy and finish imperfectly. Thank you so much, Annie, for being on this podcast today. I loved it, and I'm sure everyone else listening loved it.
Thank you, Maggie. This was fun. Yeah, I look forward to hearing everything come together. This was a fun chat. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I invite you to reflect on the questions that I asked Annie for yourself. I will put them in the show notes. I'm not a huge journaler. I'm not saying you should journal, but I do think that the method works for some deep reflective opportunities, and this is one of those. So sit quiet for a moment, reflect. I will put the questions in the show notes. Feel free to leave comments of your answers if you feel comfortable doing so. Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast if you liked it, and follow the podcast Instagram. It is darksideofperfect.pod. That is darksideofperfect, period, POD. I'll see you next time.